Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I am back with another video for Trinity Stamps. Today we are going to be making two versions of this card. One is on an A2 and one is on a shaped card. And this is called the Hey There Cupcake set. I'm using the stamps and the dies. It's very obviously an oversized cupcake, which I love. It is large enough to be a A2 size card. And it does coordinate with their cupcake card die set, so that will give you the base of the card, so that way you don't have to worry about creating it on your own. However, you can use it for the shaped card, or you can use it on an A2 sized card. I also saw someone, I think it was Sarah from the design team, where she had just a half a sheet of paper, so 5.5 by 8.25, and she stamped it in the middle and then cut it into two A2 size card bases, and had a cupcake then, like a half a cupcake on either side, and I thought that was totally brilliant. Her cards were gorgeous. So I am going to be doing coloring with my Copic markers today. I am stamping in a ink that is safe for alcohol markers, and as I'm sure you saw from the title, we are going to be talking about a super easy shading technique that you can use not just for this cupcake wrapper, but also for anything that's kind of long and cylindrical. So we're going to do it one time with grays. A lot of cupcakes have you want a neutral, I guess is how I want to say it. So coloring them white is pretty popular. And basically the entire idea of the technique is just a long straight lines. That's it. It's just long straight lines. So here on the left-hand side of the cupcake, we are going to put the darkest shading to the left of the line. Now, when it gets to the middle, we kind of have to skip that part. And then as we continue on to the right side of the cupcake, the shading line will then go on to the right side of the line. And this is with our darkest color. For us with the grays right now, that's a C5. And what this is going to do is it's going to create this dimension really easily. Because we are coloring a cupcake base and it is wider at the top than it is at the bottom, I am going to go into the bottom where those ridges are a little closer together and add just a little flick or two of shading next to the line, but only on the bottom. And then I'm going to go in with my next color, which for a white cupcake wrapper, I have 3 colors because the white of the paper is my 4th color. So now this is my mid-tone, and I'm going to go in, put that straight line all the way down, and then again, I'm just going to do a flick or two at the bottom. You don't necessarily have to do the flick or two at the bottom if you're coloring something different, but because we have that shape of the cupcake wrapper where it is wider at the top and the lines are further apart, we do want to add some additional shading at the bottom. So now we're going to move on to our lightest color. And again, we're not filling this in. We want that white of the paper to be our lightest color. And we're just going to do one stripe, so one straight line, and that will take it down to the bottom. And you can see how dimensional this cupcake is. And all we did was do some little stripes of color. I will show you this a couple of times. So that is the gray. I am going to go right in over top of this with a color. Now my reds are going to be strong enough to cover up this gray. I'm also a huge proponent of, if you don't have a lot of marker colors, you can shade with your grays and then just fill in the rest of it with one color and you would still get shading. But I have more than just, a few colors, so I'm going to utilize those. So again, I'm starting with my darkest color. I'm going in right next to that line, and then because we're coloring the cupcake wrapper, I am adding just maybe a little triangle of color there at the bottom. The trick to this is you want to just make sure you're keeping your lines similar size, but also you want to make sure that you're using colors that are contrasting enough to give you some good dimension, which means you're going to have to use a dark, and you're going to want to use a light. So your midtones, I have told you guys this before, when we talk about coloring, your midtones is what you see the most of, but the highlights and the shadows is what gives your piece dimension. So I'm going to be very honest with you. This is, some people will say like, oh, you're being too hard on yourself. But I think that it's important to be transparent about things. With the middle one, the middle piece here, you can see I'm kind of starting to come up in a triangle in the bottom of it. I have some regrets about this. Not entirely, and I'll show you at the point in which I felt like I should have stopped for this particular technique. If I was doing it the way that I would normally color a cupcake wrapper, it would have been fine, but I'm not, and kind of old habits die hard, so I was just kind of in that mode, and so that was my own doing. But now we're on to our second mid-tone, which is our lighter mid-tone, but again, you can see we're still leaving some white space, and that white space is for our lightest color. Now, if you're really controlled with your coloring, you can leave a slight white highlight there to really bump up the contrast. But since we are doing such a simple technique, I'm going to assume that the type of colorist who is watching this is probably not that controlled, which is fine because sometimes I'm not even that controlled. But you can always go back in and add it with a white gel pen, which is what we're going to do today. So now we're just filling in the rest of those with our lightest color. We have this awesome dimension in our piece. Here is the point I wish I would have stopped. Then I'm going to go in and do this little triangle. And the part I don't like is, even this probably would have been fine. I wish I hadn't connected the lines, because what it does is it creates this division in just this one cupcake wrapper piece that I don't really love. So now I'm going to have to go back in and add triangles in the other ones to help it look more cohesive. Because normally I would have added that. Like if I was just sitting down to color it and I wasn't trying to teach you something, I would have added that divot in the center. So now that we've learned how to do it in gray and we've learned how to do it in one single color, we are going to go in and make a rainbow wrapper. So you can blend these if you like. Like you could have a one of the sections be a transition where you're blending two color families. That would be fantastic. But again, for this level of coloring, I am just going to keep them super simple and color each one an individual color. So I'm starting with my red. And because I prefer like a pink, blue, purple versus a orange, yellow, green, I kind of am doing the reverse of my rainbow. So that way I know I have enough sections that I'm going to have 2 pinks, 2 purples, 2 blues, and I'm not repeating the yellow and the orange, which is just how I prefer it. You start your rainbow wherever you like. So as you can see, we're going in and it doesn't change for each color. Everything is the same. We're doing that one straight line down. And then again, only because we're coloring a cupcake wrapper are we adding that little triangle at the bottom. But if you were coloring anything else, we're going to color the candle the same way with one small additional step. But you could color anything that is long, tall, and cylindrical. Well, even if it's short and cylindrical, like you could color it this way. I've done nail polish bottles like this. You could do trees like this. You can do any sort of container like vases, a lighthouse, because that's like taller and so look for that particular shape, and then you can know whether or not this technique will work for that. But it creates a really natural highlight. So if you're doing something like a lighthouse or a tree, you're actually going to want to do it with the extra step that we use on the candle. But because these are already sectioned off for us, it works really, really nicely to create a lot of dimension without us having to think too hard about it. So as I get to the center here, there is something that I am going to do different, because remember, I didn't love what I did in the first one, and that's okay. Everything is a learning opportunity. I'm certainly not going to recolor that cupcake. That card's going to go to somebody and they probably are not even going to notice. But so with this one, what I'm going to do is the orange is going to be the last color that I do the shadow part on the right-hand side. So I'm going to just do this, you know, darkest, dark midtone, light midtone, and then lightest, just like we have been doing. But now when I switch back over to the red, I'm going to do the darkest shading on the left hand side. So I'm not going to have that transition one like I did in the first one. I'm just going to switch it over. So it's going to kind of push the orange out just a little bit because the orange will have dark on both sides of it. But that's okay. That to me still looks better than the other version. So now I'm just going to go through, I'm going to speed this up and fill out the rest of the colors, and then we're going to move on to the candles. So you might be nervous about like, oh, we're going to add an extra step in the candles. We are, but it's the same thing that we have already been doing. So don't panic yet. Don't panic before we get there. It's going to be okay. This is, I did, I think, a video years ago with the nail polish bottle showing this same technique, but I think it was like I said, like 6 or 7 years ago. So I don't even know if that's something that, you know, you guys would have seen. So now moving on to the candles, what we're going to do is, well, I'm going to fill in the flames, and I'm just going to use colors we already used before. Remind me to come back and talk about the flames. But anyway, so for the candle, for the red one, I'm going to do a red candle, but this time, instead of adding the line on just one side, I'm going to add it to both sides, which is going to create a center highlight. And because my candle is a, you know, like a cylinder, a small cylinder, but a cylinder nonetheless, leaving that darkness on the edges and the center highlight is going to give it a ton of dimension, and we're still just repeating those lines. This time we're just adding it to both the left and the right hand sides. That's why I said if you did like a tree or a lighthouse or something like that, you would want to add it to both sides, because those images would wrap around, and that shadow is giving the illusion that the image continues on. So now we're going to move on to shading the cupcake. For this one, because I already have so much color going on here, I just went with white. I like a cooler gray, but you could use warm grays, you could use toner grays, you know, whatever you like to use for your whites. Some people like to use colors as well, as if like you would maybe see the rainbow colors kind of like reflecting up into the white frosting. I'm keeping it simple. So for my shadows, we already have a lot of shadows that are stamped into the image. So I'm just following those and kind of extending out the gray. You do want to make sure, you can see these ones, these little round, like almost comma shapes that we're putting on the left and right hand sides of the frosting. You want to make sure that you leave a white edge in between your shading and the stamp, because that's what's going to act as our highlight to give it so much dimension. So going through with the C5, just extending out those lines and adding those little C shapes, then the C3 over top of that. The C1 is going to start connecting those like those lines of the underneath to those little C comma shapes on the edge. Now down at the bottom, I did give it maybe a little bit more character. You don't necessarily have to do that with, you know, drawing the indent. But that's all there is to it, because with white, you're only putting in the shadows. So for this one, I wanted to do the white again, but I wanted it to have like a little chocolate ganache or a little hot fudge or something to make it more interesting on the top. So I am going to do the same way that I colored the white. I'm going to do the same thing again, but I'm going to do it after I give myself an edge where my chocolate is going to end. So that way I know where I need to be coloring, but also so I can do this, which is add a little bit of shadow underneath my hot fudge to help it look more dimensional. So I added the darkest, the C5, where it indents the most, and then kind of all to the left-hand side of each of the drips as it comes down. Then with the C3, I used all along the bottom edge, and the C1 blended everything out. And then now we're going to go do the same thing that we did with the white cupcake. The shading will still all be in the same spot, even though it's the chocolate. And this would how you would do it if you wanted to color chocolate frosting or strawberry frosting or whatever. But with the white of the paper is our fourth color. here showing you, how we would do it with a regular color. So that way you would know how to do it going forward, because typically you're not going to have the white of the paper as that extra color. So I always like to add a little bit of darkness underneath the kind of the parts where it's dripping, so there is a little bit of a highlight. And then earlier I had told you, your midtone is what you see the most of. This is a great example of that, because the midtone is what we're going to fill in the vast majority of this with, because we want it to be chocolate. So we're still leaving those kind of highlight edges, around the outside edge. Those will be filled in. They won't be left white this time. They'll be filled in with our lightest color. But we want to just make sure that we're not, filling those in with darker colors. It's going to ruin the look of the dimension. I shouldn't say ruin, because that seems pretty aggressive. I mean, it's just going to make the dimension look less if you fill it in. I like to start with more of my lighter colors than my darker colors, because it's a lot easier to add the darker back in than it is to take it away. So here I'm filling in the vast majority of it with this midtone, which for me is an E57, but you could use whatever, browns or reds or whatever flavor you're coloring in. You could probably even do some like yellowish, warmer brown colors for like a caramel. That would be fun. So here I've filled it in. Now I'm going to go in with my lightest color and fill in those highlights. And pretty quickly I was like, I'm not really happy with the amount of dimension that I have. It just was not, I wasn't believing that this was chocolate. So I knew that I needed to go back in and add in more of my darker color, which is fine. You can always go back in and layer over your, previous colors. As long as you're not being too heavy-handed, you shouldn't really have an issue with your paper bleeding if you're using the right kind of paper. My go-to is Nina 80-pound solar white cardstock, and that's always worked for my Copics. That's also what I use when I color with my Olos or with the Altenews artist markers, any of those. But I have seen people say with the Olos, because they are free-flowing ink, that can be a little bit more challenging. So just make sure you know what your paper can take before, you're just doing layers upon layers. We're only doing 2 layers here, and so really any paper should be able to do that outside of like printer paper, which doesn't like markers anyway, so don't use that. So now we're filling it in a little bit darker, and then we're going back in and blending it out just like we did before. So then I went back in with the 57, and now I'll go back in with the 55. And then that will, I might do maybe 1 or 2 more tweaks till I'm happy with the way that it's looking. But I fully intend, just like with the wrapper, I told you we could go back in with the white gel pen and add highlights. I am going to do the same thing with my frosting. With this frosting, I don't have to do it with the white one because we left those in the coloring. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. Something to note, if you have the cupcake card die set, it has the middle that would be cut out for you to use. This one does not. So in order to create that part, when you stamp it down, there are 2 lines that you can see that come up from the top that are the actual cupcake base. So I just cut along those lines so that you could see that you could use this part, because basically you just need, it's such a small little, it's like maybe 1/4 of an inch. It's such a small gap in there. Then if you're doing a shaped card like this one is here, you don't necessarily, you would have a base you would be gluing it to. And then on the other one, I intend to make that an A2 size card. So again, I have a base. So you don't necessarily need this piece, but if you wanted that piece, like if you were popping it up and you wanted to make sure that you would, you'd be able to pop up the whole cupcake, this is how you would do it. And then I just used the frosting as a free edge. I went in with a C1 to make sure that I didn't ruin my white frosting, to kind of trace the bottom edge. And then I'm filling in my chocolate for my cupcake. Both of my cupcakes are chocolate cupcakes. So then the other thing that I wanted to do is, I wanted to put in my candle. Like I wanted my candle to be actually inside my frosting. So I am going to use an X-Acto knife to cut it. So now for this one, it is a little bit too high up in order to fit on an A2 size card. So I had to move it down. Fortunately for me, mine were in like the same exact spot. So the candle is going to cover that one at the top. If you're not worried about it fitting into an A2 size envelope, if you have a 5x7, then by all means you could put your candle up this high and it would be no big deal. But I could see that I don't have a lot of other size envelopes. And so that one, it just wasn't going to work for me to be able to like give it to somebody in a card. Candle I told you about. So I didn't know this, and I don't have them, but I do need to for sure get my hands on them. Apparently, Pear Blossom Press has a light, like where you could light up the candle, and you can actually blow it out. So I'm like, that is super, super cool. So here I've built my cupcake. Again, this is going to be the one that is the shaped card. I have colored in the wish for the Make-A-Wish. And then I am just going to glue that down right on top. And then for the other one, I am going to glue this to my A2 card base. But I'm going to add just a little bit of a shadow underneath it. I didn't do a background, but you absolutely could. Like you could do a colored background or some ink blending or something like that. Just like I kept it monochromatic. So, you know, it was a pretty, red's like, I don't know, a universal color. You can give that to literally anybody except maybe me because I don't really love it. But anyway, so I'm just going to add a little bit of a shadow underneath here. So that way it isn't floating in just like off in the wind. And then I use those same gray markers because I'm just repeating. I typically repeat my colors in my card making because it helps just make it look more cohesive. And then again, I will just glue the sentiment down. This time I went kind of more to the right versus in the center. The couple of last, like, you know how I am about details. Last detail kind of things. I added sprinkles. Oh, you know what? We went through this whole thing and I didn't even tell you guys about the sale. I'm so sorry. Like I was so excited about the card. So Trinity is actually having a sale right now. It's their super summer sale. It's 26% off. And the code will be linked below. But then also I think they have an additional percentage off of their clearance. So yeah, I was so excited about the technique. I completely forgot about the sale. So anyway, I added the clear glitter to my cupcakes. And then I also, again, I went in with a white gel pen and added a white edge. Just, you can see the difference that makes. It like really bumps up the contrast. And then for the chocolate, I went around the lighter edges where we put that E55 and just added a white line to that to help it kind of pop up. And then for the sprinkles, I actually used mostly, but this sounds so funny to say, mostly bubbles and bubbles to do that. And I did a bunch of rainbow colored ones on my rainbow cupcake. And then I originally was going to do I think it's called Moonstone. Yeah, which is like a white. I was originally going to do those on the other ones, and I actually ended up doing a clear. And I'm not sure how I feel about that, but decisions were made. After I was done putting them on, I did go in with the C3 and just do a little bit of shading underneath and blend it out with the C1. And that helps them to look like they are sitting in the frosting versus just sitting on top of the frosting. And then that is it. That is both cards. So whether you want to make a cupcake shaped card or an A2 size card, these are super cute and super fun. And now you know an easy way to color them. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.